Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session, Understanding and Addressing Current Issues in Peer Review. I'm Ann Bynan from Clarivate, and I'm joined by...
My name is Yulia Sevrogina. I'm from University of Michigan, Ann Arbor.
And I'm Kim Eggleton from the Institute of Physics Publishing.
We look forward to hearing from you after our presentation. So our agenda for today is to talk about the current state of peer review, challenges in peer review, a deep dive into the time to complete peer reviews and the need for transparency, and a case study of transparent peer review. So I'm going to start with some background. I think most of you are familiar with the environment we're working in with peer review. It's one aspect of the overall research integrity crisis that I'm sure you've heard about in publishing. So there are many, many challenges. These are just some of them. Reviewer fatigue. There's not enough reviewers doing the work. Diversity. The reviewers are not representative of the overall population of authors. There's a lot of biases that go on. That's been well studied. There are even review mills that are similar to paper mills, etc. There's also potential solutions. We, of course, can't cover all of these today, but open peer reviews have been suggested and tried, post-publication peer reviews, giving people more credit for peer review, even financial incentives like payments or open access credits. So I'm going to show you just some data on the current state of peer review just to set the stage. So this comes from our Web of Science profiles at Clarivate. So these are author profiles where people can include their peer review contributions in addition to their authorship of papers. So there are many profiles. I put some numbers in here, 1.5 million of these profiles from across the world that have reviews, and that accounts for 22.4 million reviews total of 11.7 million articles. And we calculate something called the Review Distribution Index, which looks at the percent of reviewers on the horizontal and the percent of reviews on the vertical to try to gauge how many people are doing the reviews, how distributed this is. And, if it were an even distribution, if every one person were doing one review, we'd have the diagonal line. That is not the case. As you can see, it's a very skewed distribution where 10% of reviewers are responsible for 51% of the reviews. So this is that reviewer fatigue issue. We even calculate this coefficient with this information where one means very unequal distribution of reviewers and reviews. And the current value for that on that scale of 0 to 1 is 0.67. When we did this in 2018, it was 0.6. So it's actually gotten worse over the past few years. So this is definitely part of the issue. Here's another way to look at peer review using, again, the same information we have in our profiles. We actually have the text of reviews, so we can look at the length of the reviews and correlate that with different things. So the length of the review sometimes is used as a proxy for quality. That's somewhat subjective, but if we take it as one way to think about the quality of a review, we can look at it in conjunction with the journal impact factor, which is one measure of citation impact of journals that you're probably familiar with. And here we broke down all of the journal impact factors we have for the Web of Science core collection into 20ths or ventiles, and then correlated that with the review length. And the boxes show you the range, and the lines in the boxes are the median length of the reviews. So you can see that as we go to the right, as the impact factors start to increase at the higher level, the length of the reviews also increases. So there does seem to be some correlation there, at least between citation impact and the length of the reviews. And we can also look at that by region. So here we're correlating the length of the reviews in words with the region of the reviewer, and there are differences. So these are selected countries. You can see the Netherlands has the highest number of words, very different from India at the other end of the spectrum, with only about 100 words median in their reviews. So these regional differences also have to be taken into account, and we do find that the established countries tend to have longer reviews and the emerging countries have shorter reviews.
Um, As Anne showed, more recently, peer review has been facing its moment of crisis. Critics have argued that the peer review process is not doing a good job of distinguishing good science from bad. Several high-profile papers have been published in top journals after having passed through peer review, only to be heavily criticized after publication or retracted amid allegations of fraud. In 2011, Great Britain's House of Commons commissioned a report on the state of peer review and concluded that while peer review is crucial to the reputation and reliability of scientific research, many scientists believe the system stifles progress, is often biased, and that there is little solid evidence on its efficacy. The last 30 years displayed high growth in the number of retracted peer review manuscripts. Retracted manuscripts provide actually a great window into issues that bypass the peer review process. Those include misconduct, errors, author issues, but specifically in this presentation, I would like to focus on the issues directly related to peer review, such as fake peer review, when peer review was intentionally not performed in accordance with the journal's guidelines or ethical standards, rogue editor, when the editor had false credentials or did not exist, and issues labeled as concerns, when the peer review was not performed due to journal error or when peer review issues were not specified. I should mention that analyzing retracted manuscripts became much easier with the Retraction Watch database assembled by Ivan Aransky and Adam Marcus in August 2010, which we acknowledge here for its data. In the following analysis, we included retracted journal and review articles written in English and published during the last 20 years. As this heat map demonstrates, our collection is almost entirely represented by manuscripts retracted due to fake peer review, the total of 2,900 manuscripts, and about half of them also had rogue editor. Although we include the last 20 years of publishing, as you can see, the majority of retracted manuscripts were published in most recent years, and they mainly are contributed by engineering and technology fields. Together, peer review-related retractions constitute about 12% of all manuscripts retracted during the same time period. Some indications that the peer review is fake are extremely quick turnaround times within 24 hours and, in some cases, only a few minutes, while the standard peer review time would be around 100 days. As my colleague Anne presented, these reviews are also often brief and positive and uniformly favor immediate acceptance for publication. Another indication is that peer review issues are often accompanied by other issues such as errors, author issues, and plagiarism. Retraction Watch started tracking fake peer reviews in 2012. And in the Nature paper that followed, Marcus, Aransky, and Ferguson presented several cases that exposed vulnerabilities of publication management systems. In particular, in Scholar 1, when a reviewer is invited to read the paper, he or she is sent an email with login information. If that communication goes to a fake email account, the recipient can sign into the system under whatever name was initially submitted, with no additional identity verification. As this problem came into light, publishers took measures to further increase password security, incorporate additional identifiers such as ORCID for reviewers' identity verification step, and some publishers ceased asking authors to suggest their own reviewers. The Committee on Publication Ethics issued a statement on inappropriate manipulation of peer review process, noting that it had become aware of systematic, inappropriate attempts to manipulate the peer review process of several journals across different publishers. However, unlike Retraction Watch, COPY treated this primarily as a third-party activity, noting that some agencies are selling services ranging from authorship of pre-written manuscripts to providing fabricated contact details for peer reviewers during the submission process and then supplying reviews from these fabricated addresses. The agency's copy refers to are called paper mills, which is the whole other challenge in publishing, which we will not cover here. When comparing peer review turnaround times associated with other issues, our analysis showed that not only fake peer reviews, but fraudulent papers also display significantly short peer review times. For example, as you can see from this table, it's 71 days on average as compared to standard peer review time of 100 days. And I should also mention that all peer review data in this analysis is based on PubMed data. And now I will give a floor to my colleague Anne to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. So I also have data on time to complete peer reviews. Now, this is from Scholar One. It's not related to anything retracted per se. It's just to give you information overall on what this looks like. So Scholar One, you might know, is a manuscript workflow and peer review tracking system used by many publishers. The data here reflect over 8,000 journals from 580 publishers around the world, different fields. And just looking over time, over these years, at how long it took from someone accepting the peer review to completing it, you can see that, this has changed. So the green line shows that it's decreased over time from 20.88 days to 18.94 days. The number of manuscripts actually being tracked, is quite large here. You could see in the millions, and, it's fluctuated a bit, but grown throughout the years. Now here we take the same data on the time to complete, but looking at the country of the reviewer. So there are differences in how long it takes people to do their reviews based on the country they're in. So you can see at the one end, we have France with the longest time, 21.66 days on average, and then Japan on the other end with 13.82 days. We don't have all the countries here, but just to give you some examples, there may be differences in the workload of these people or their culture, their language, different things, but there are differences that have to be taken into account. And then lastly, we do the same thing, the time to complete the review from Scholar One, but based on the subject area of the journal. So again, there are differences to account for here. You can see that there are quite a few papers that fall in the not categorized bucket. There are a couple reasons for that. But nonetheless, you could see at the left side, something like mathematics has the longest time, 59.08 days. Very different if we go to the right end with chemistry, 11.9 days. So, there are many different facets that have to be looked at when thinking about this time to complete issue. Now over to Kim.
Thank you both. So I'm going to take us in a little deep dive into one specific example. So as I said earlier, I'm from the Institute of Physics Publishing. We use Scholar One and we're obsessed with peer review data. So this is a really good opportunity for us all to take a look at what's made up, what does that time in peer review, what's it made up of, and potentially how's it evolved. Our data specifically only goes back 3 to 4 years, but it's really interesting. You obviously have to put a big caveat over the pandemic period as well, because a lot of things changed in that time, but there's some really interesting trends going on. So this first thing that I wanted to explore is whose time contributes to peer review. So if we assume that there's 3 major players in a standard article peer review process, we've got some authors, we've got some reviewers, and we've got usually 1 or more editors. And you can see here that about 35% of the time, this is from initial receipt to final acceptance, about 35% of that the article will spend in the author's kind of control, 39% it will spend at the mercy of reviewers, and about 26% under an editor's supervision. And this is based on our data from 2024. This is to the end of September. So our reviewers take on average 3.5 days to actually agree to report, and then about 12.5 days to return that report. Bearing in mind we're a physics publisher, I'm relieved to see that tally completely with Anne's data in the previous graph. Although also as a publisher of a couple of mathematics journals, I'm both reassured and frustrated by mathematics, but that's a separate discussion for a separate day. Authors this year have been taking an average of about 24 days to revise their article, and a typical article with us will go through about 1.5 revisions per accepted paper. So that in total adds up to an average of 103 days that it's spending between that complete receipt to acceptance period. It's worth just pointing out that this data is obviously A, it's all averages, B, it's only one publisher. But I did want to point out that the editors and the reviewers portions, there's a huge amount of overlap there. As anybody that's ever spent any time trying to get reviewers to report on manuscripts, not everybody will agree at the same time, not everyone will report at the same time. So it's quite likely that in the majority of cases we'll have an article that is with one reviewer, but is also still with the editor who's looking for that second reviewer and hoping for them to report. So these aren't finite. There's overlap and there's grey in this, but I think it's a really interesting overlay as to who's doing what in peer review. And then when we drill down a little bit and go and look at, well, what's reviewers' time in peer review changing? How does that look? If we can flick onto the next slide, please. And apologies for how small some of these graphs are. You can see on the left-hand side how long it takes reviewers to actually respond to the invitation. So that fluctuates massively. Again, bear in mind there's COVID years, mostly towards the left side of that graph. But generally, it was looking, especially through 2023, that was increasing. In 2024, we took some preventative action in a sense, and we actually reduced the deadline that we gave our reviewers to report, and that's had a really marked effect. It is also true, I think, at least in our data, that reviewers are really obedient people. They will typically respond by whatever deadline you give them within reason. They will still complain, but ultimately they will return the report by the date given. Mathematics is probably another exception, but in general, reviewers will try and do their absolute best to meet a deadline, assuming it's reasonable in the first place. The graph on the right is, sorry, go back a slide. Sorry, Julia. The graph on the right is talking about how long it actually takes the reviewers to complete the report. And that is, you can see, consistently getting faster and faster and faster. And that's not necessarily action that we've taken. There is on occasion some journals where we've revisited the deadlines, but in general, I think that's quite an organic shift that we're seeing. So reviewers typically are getting faster. Again, that supports Anne's data over the last few years. Whatever's underneath that, we don't quite know, but organically it does look like reviewers are getting faster to report. Now the next slide. Thank you, Julia. So this next one is looking at authors' behaviour. So if we start first by, well, what are we asking our authors to do? We are definitely increasing the number of revisions per paper that we're expecting of authors. Again, there's probably multiple reasons behind that, but it's my suspicion, at least, that the research integrity crisis is probably playing a part there. Editors are looking for more rigor. They're more open to responding and asking more of their authors, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I think editors are probably more wary now of publishing something that's imperfect. It could also be, though, that reviewers are becoming more critical. It could generally be that the work is worse to start with. Maybe more authors are being more bold and they're submitting work that 10 years ago they'd have taken more time to perfect. Now we know that publish or perish. Everybody's really trying to get their work out faster. Looking at the graph on the right, this is how long authors take to complete their revisions. And you can see authors were really, really starting to slow down. And we saw at the end of 2023 a real peak in how long authors were taking. We don't really know what's behind that. It's actually something we're trying to look at with our data analytics team at the moment. One of the theories that we have is that it was potentially one of the first times that people were going back to conferences in person. That would be kind of conference season for the physics community. So it could be that that's had an impact there. It's really, really unclear. But I do want to point out that drop that we've now seen in 2024, we think that's very much led by activities that we've taken as a publishing house to try and reduce our deadlines for authors to make sure that they're returning their reviewers faster. Because interestingly, it's reviewers that will always say, "Oh, please give us longer, please give us longer," and it's authors that say, "But we want the decision now. We want to go faster." And of course, everybody is both a reviewer and an author at some point in the year. Um, but we do see and feel that pressure from authors that they want us to go faster, whereas we see the pressure from reviewers that they want us to go slower. So we're really trying to keep both parties happy and messing about. Changing some of the deadlines in the system is a really we found a really helpful way of doing that, trying to just tweak consumer behavior to ultimately give them what they want. The next slide shows you where we display this data. So obviously we don't go into this amount of detail on our website, but what we do at the journal level is try and display that very high expectation or current performance to prospective authors. So this is what you might expect. It'll be 6 days before we know whether we're going to proceed to peer review or not. It'll be about 45 days that you might start to expect a decision, assuming that you're going through the peer review process. And then the next slide shows if you drill down where you can see that full list of journal metrics, you can actually see what that is made up of. So we've tried to be really clear with our descriptions. What does it mean? Is peer review included? Does that mean rejected articles are included or not? What's the desk rejection rate? Because this stuff all makes a big difference. So we've tried to be really transparent about the data that we share. But this takes me on to the challenges. I do think transparency is a real solution to the research integrity crisis and some of the other challenges that Anne's discussed in peer review in general. But getting to that transparency is not as straightforward as just saying everybody needs to put their peer review times on their website. And some of the challenges, firstly, the caveat that obviously the times I've shared with you today are representative of just IOP publishing. But then it comes down to this taxonomy of, well, what do we all mean the same thing by acceptance? Do we mean the same thing by revision? How would a resubmission be treated, for example? Many publishers have transfers and cascade schemes. Are those type of papers that maybe started with one journal and ended up at another? How are they treated in the data? So I think there's a really good opportunity for us as an industry to get together and think about what those terminology, what they mean, and could we come to some kind of collective agreement that might make it more useful and easier for our authors to understand exactly what data we're sharing. But then the obvious challenge is that whoever goes first is okay, but whoever goes second is going to be compared to whoever went first. So there is some real risk for publishers to share this data. It's not often that we can compare ourselves to other publishers when we're talking about speed. There was a really good article in Scholarly Kitchen a while ago that did talk about peer review speed. But again, there's no qualification about some of the terms that everybody's using. So we're not sure whether we are comparing apples to apples or apples to oranges. So that's just a quick snapshot of what we're doing at IOP. Anne's now going to talk a little bit about how transparent peer review might be another solution.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to explain how this service works, and then Kim will explain what they do at IOP. So this is a service we provide at Clarivate for ScholarOne customers. So the way it works is, here's an example of an IOP article on their website, and there's a icon here under article metrics that talks about the peer reviews. And if we go forward, you can, yep. And so it links to all the open peer review information. So you'll see here in this panel, if we just click one more time, it has, the text of all the letters back and forth between the reviewer, the author, the decision letter, the dates on all of these. So all of this is available to anyone who wants to see it completely. And then if we move on, it works the other way as well, that if we find the same article in the Web of Science, then we have this section that says open peer reviews. And when we click on that, it'll open up that same panel where you can see all that great information to understand the back and forth between the reviewers and the author and the decision letter and everything. So that's all freely available. Even if you don't have Web of Science, you can see these open peer review records. And we think that this is a great way to increase the transparency for publishers that want to do this. And I'll just show you a couple statistics in the next slide on who's using this. So it's a small but growing number of journals. So you could see the publishers who are using this service. It's a relatively new thing that we've done. So there's 194 journals currently employing this, and that accounts for 45,000 articles. So of course, it's a small number when you think that there are 22,000 journals in the Web of Science core collection. But you could see here if you'd like things like the median citations per article, average reviews per article, just added some indicators here if you find that interesting. All of them have sort of similar average number of reviews per article, but I definitely encourage you to check this out. It is something that is out there and available. And back over to Kim.
So as Anne said, we've had transparent peer review available on our journals since about 2018. And we started out with a small group of journals. It's now on all of our proprietary titles. And we deal with this in a non-mandatory way. So our authors are given the opportunity to opt in, and our reviewers are also given the opportunity to opt in. So only if the authors and the reviewers all say yes to making everything transparent, only at that point would everything be shared online. So you can see here in the chart on the left, just under half of our reviewers opt in. Authors, under half of our authors opt in to this service. This is for the complete year 2023. Really interestingly, this is not a statistic that we see changing at all. It's really been consistent over the last few years. We don't typically see more and more authors being open to this. So it doesn't seem like there's much evolution in people's way of thinking. They're either pretty firmly in or pretty firmly out. For the reviewers, then it's a very different picture in a sense. Firstly, all the reviewers have to agree. So we typically will invite 2 or even 3 reviewers per manuscript. If one of those reviewers says yes, but the other 2 say no, then none of the reports will be shared. So we need all of the reviewers to say yes, we're happy, in order for us to publish the reports. So actually, when you look at that collective, it's only 18% of our articles have reviewer opt-in. I should make also clear that the reviewers are not named in the way we do transparent peer review. We do give them the option to sign their reports if they want to, but we don't mandate that. We typically run either a double or a single anonymous peer review. And so when you put these two statistics together, what we actually have is only about a 9% article opt-in rate, which is reasonably low. And again, just to reiterate, this is not seemingly an evolving picture. There's a resistance there in our authors and our reviewer groups that people are still not comfortable with this, at least in the physics community. So moving on now to think about what some of those challenges are. One of the things that we are still lacking is a little bit of data. So what we'd love to be able to understand is, well, how are these reports being read? But that said, that's not going to stop us doing it. Even if nobody reads those reports, we still think it's absolutely the right thing to do for the future of science, for research integrity. But it would be interesting to know how often those reports are being read and if there's anything we can do to improve that. But ultimately, it comes down to that lack of researcher buy-in. How do we encourage people that it is safe to share your reports, that it is safe to be open and sort of share the process that you've been through? What we don't really understand is our author or reviewer objection. So why do they opt out? And actually, in the preparation for this session, Yulia was kind enough to share some quotes from some studies that she'd done. And this one really stuck out to me, that somebody said, your comments will not be anonymous, which worries them, but also that your comments on their paper will be open for the world to see, and that can be pretty sensitive for people. So it may be that's a great example of the kind of objections that our reviewers have, and maybe our authors too. And that's a piece of work that we'd be really interested in doing, is starting to do some deep dive kind of surveys or focus groups with our authors and reviewers to understand what those objections are. So ultimately, we really believe in this. We really want to push it forwards. We do want to mandate it, but we can't do that at the expense of losing, our authors and reviewers. So we need to find a way to bring the scientific community with us on this journal, rather than maybe perceived as being enforcing it, and that they then come to resist it. So that's the end of our presentation. We will now be moving into a Q&A session, which will be live. A huge thank you just in advance of that from myself, Julia and Anne. A quick note before we move into the Q&A, Charleston does have a code of conduct, which you will see on the screen in front of you. Please just do be mindful that everybody's expected to treat each other with respect. And you can also click through to the website to read the full text just by scanning your phone over that QR code. So thank you again for listening. We really enjoyed it, and we're looking forward to the Q&A.